I'm Greg Jarrett, and you are in the strategy room. Iran's Navy is once again raising security concerns. A Pentagon official told Fox News Tuesday 4 Iranian patrol boats intercepted a U.S.-flagged container ship last Friday in the Persian Gulf along an internationally recognized maritime route. This is the latest incident involving the Iranians, so what's behind their recent actions? Here now with analysis, retired Army Brigadier General Ernest Audino and Ambassador Eric Edelman with the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments. Gentlemen, pleasure to have you both with us. General Audino, let me begin with you. Why are the Iranians doing this? What's their motivation, do you suspect?
Well, I don't think anybody knows for sure what their motivations are, except for the Iranians. But, there's a range of possible motivations. And one, it could be just a mistake. I don't really believe that. 2, it could be a way to ratchet up some of the pressure on Saudi Arabia and the Saudi coalition that right now is trying to constrain the opposition inside Yemen. Now, that's possible as well. But there's another important piece right here, and I think it's this. This was not the Iranian Navy that did this. This was the naval element of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps. Mm-hmm. And so that is in many ways the real power inside Iran right now. There have been many reports that the IRGC has not been particularly happy with where the nuclear negotiations are going right now. Right. This could very well have been motivated by some desire within the IRGC to put some pressure on those nuclear negotiations.
Which leads me to my question to Ambassador Edelman. How does this affect, if at all, the U.S. negotiations, the nuclear negotiations with Tehran?
Well, Greg, I would say that it should affect the negotiations, but that'll be up to the administration to decide in terms of their negotiating strategy. I agree with what General Audino just said. We don't really know exactly what the motivation was, but the IRGC, as he rightly points out, is the heart of the regime. So it's hard to imagine that this was totally an unauthorized or random or rogue act. I think the important point here is that it should be part of the negotiations because the United States has been, in the course of these negotiations, in my view, conceding a great deal on the nuclear issue and not contesting Iran's effort to assert its hegemony throughout the region. This is just the latest manifestation of that, and we need to contest it across the board.
General Audino, assuming that this was deliberate by the Iranians and the Revolutionary Guard, as you point out, was it, in military terms, a provocative act? What should the United States military response be?
Yeah. Well, it's certainly a provocative act, but it may not be a reasonable act on the side of the IRGC, and I think they know that. Here's the problem for the IRGC and the Iranian Navy in general. Iran is not a maritime power right now. For that matter, the entire Persian Empire was never a maritime power. And so, toe-to-toe with the U.S. naval assets that are in theater right now, this is a losing proposition and a big one for Iran militarily. Don't forget, these are the same guys who in the late 80s during the tanker wars, you may remember those, when they threatened and actually began trying to mine the Straits of Hormuz, we sunk everything they put in the water, we sunk. It really wasn't hard at all for us to do that. Now, the problem is, even though this is essentially a militarily insignificant activity on the part of the Iranians, it has serious economic and diplomatic effect. And let's just look at the economic effect for crying out loud. 30% of the world's seaborne crude flows through the Straits of Hormuz, and a significant portion, probably a quarter of the world's gas flows through there as well. Any disruption to that flow or even a threatened flow through the Straits of Hormuz has an instant reaction in the markets.
Ambassador Edelman, point well taken by the general about the enormous economic impact and, in turn, the influence the Iranians may have in that region by virtue of their actions. How should the U.S., in a non-military, diplomatic way, address this?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to remember that the support for freedom of navigation in the Persian Gulf is a bipartisan policy that has been defined as a vital interest of the United States at least since the Carter Doctrine in 1981 and probably before that. So this is something that ought to have general support in the United States. General's right to remind people about Operation Praying Mantis. It was the largest naval operation since World War II, and the Iranians lost half their navy as a result of it, and that's not something that I think they want to repeat, and therefore it's something we ought to remind them of periodically. We don't want to have a military solution to this problem if we don't have to, but Iran needs to understand that they're really playing with fire here potentially.
Yeah, which means, General, I suppose we need to be waving a big stick in that region. We have certainly increased our presence there, the U.S. Navy with ships in the region that they've now moved into. Are you satisfied with how they're handling that? Do they need to have a greater presence?
No, I think we're in good position right now. And then another question, of course, is are the Saudis in a good position? And the Saudis just did something that I think is pretty clever. To continue to constrain the opposition in there inside Yemen right now, logistically, they've not only blockaded the maritime ports along the Yemeni coast, they've just recently struck the airstrip, the airport in Sana'a. So what does that do? That denies the use of that airport to any attempts by Iran to resupply the Houthi rebels by air. And they did it in a way where they didn't have to kinetically engage Iranian air assets. Now, that would have ratcheted this situation up dramatically.
Ambassador, final question to you. As the general identified this conflict between the Houthi rebels backed by Iran and Saudi Arabia, which gets a lot of its military hardware from the U.S., is this essentially a proxy war between the U.S. and Iran?
I think right now it's a proxy war between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and some of the other Gulf states and Iran, playing out in Yemen. It's been developing for quite some time. I think that the Iranians are feeling a little bit of pressure from the United States. I think they're feeling the pressure of the dispatch of the Theodore Roosevelt out to the theater, and threatening to shut down the straits is something that they have periodically done, and it may well be, although I agree with the general, we don't know what the motivation is, it may well be that this most recent act was just what I like to call station identification, a reminder that they could do that with the economic consequences you discussed earlier, Greg.
All right. General Audino, Ambassador Edelman, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. All my honor.
Great to be with you.
Check out foxnews.com for more on this developing story. I'm Greg Jarrett. Thanks for watching.